Peter Hitchens is here. Just before we start talking to him, let's have a look at Kemi Badenoch from last night talking to Keir Starmer about grooming gangs.
Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
I don't think there's any doubt about that last sentence. This is one of the worst scandals in British history. Abstaining from that vote, of course, Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, David Lammy, Ed Miliband and Wes Streeting. I'm quite sure why. Let's talk to Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Mail, see what's going on in his world. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. I mean, it's inevitable that we will move on from it, but we must ask you first off all about this grooming gang scandal. A lot of people saying that this is categorising Britain now in a pretty shameful light. I mean, I don't know how to explain it to people, really, as to how we managed to let this happen in this country and let it go on for so long that it's actually still going on.
Well, I think the explanation remains quite simple, and it was the one which was more or less uncovered by the brave journalists and whistleblower police officers, and amongst others, who exposed it in the first place. There was an extreme reluctance in local government and in the police to accept that this was going on out of a fear of being accused of racism. And generally this great miasma of political correctness which hangs over the country prevented action. My slight puzzlement is that I had thought that owing to the courageous actions of these people, we'd got over that. And that it still seems to me to be the proper response to it is that the police should now be pursuing, and the Crown Prosecution Service should now be prosecuting the people involved. And the best way of bringing this scandal to an end is for those people who behave in this disgusting way to be prosecuted and find their way, when found guilty, to prison. And I stick with that. I'm slightly puzzled as to why we have to go through it all again in the House of Commons with political parties, both the major political parties, it seems to be posturing without any particular signs of sincerity. I'm not, I have to say this, I'm not at all sure that another inquiry is going to make life that much harder for the perpetrators. And I'm not absolutely sure why it is we're discussing this, apart from the desire of certain American persons to intervene in our politics for reasons I don't fully understand.
Yes, I mean, it is kind of ironic that we are discussing it really as a result of Elon Musk, because, you know, these stories have been uncovered, they've been discussed, they've been written about, and we have had some cases where people have been sent to prison, so much so that some of them have now come out and haven't been deported, even though they should have been. But, you know...
Well, that's true.
Yeah, there is, I think...
That's shocking, but it again, will an inquiry make it more likely?
No, I'm beginning to think along the same lines. I think I'd rather see... I was saying this yesterday, a kind of almost a task force, if you like, if you want to call it that, rather than an inquiry, almost a sort of Elliot Ness-style investigative body, which is made up of judicial individuals and perhaps law enforcement individuals to go after those people who were involved in the cover-up.
Or maybe, I mean, again, I'm not sure what criminal offences have been committed here. You can't prosecute people for things which weren't criminal offences at the time. But it may be, I'm very sceptical about the purpose and existence of the National Crime Agency. It's constantly described as Britain's FBI in a country which doesn't have a federal system. But given the local pressures on this might be a case for the NCA to be unleashed on the perpetrators. I don't know. All I'm saying is that Elon Musk understands this country so well, he thinks that King Charles can dissolve Parliament.
Yes.
And I am slightly puzzled as to why we're dancing so much to his tune. It's a disgusting business, and people did terrible things and got away with them for years, and other people failed to act on them. But that's our business. It's not the business of somebody in California.
Right. But I guess the interesting part about all of that is that there are two strands to it this morning, because your piece in the Mail, which is fascinating, about how we must be careful of American interference, if you like, not because of interference being wrong, but just because of perhaps the motivation of those people. But also looking at the front page of the Times, we've got Sebastian Gorka, a man who I've interviewed many times on this show, who's about to become a close advisor to Donald Trump in the White House on counter-terrorism, saying that we should be taking back Britons who went out to the Middle East to join ISIS, because it's our responsibility for the kind of the fight against terrorism.
Well, I don't know. These things are bizarre. I am against interference in this country's affairs by people from other countries, just as I frequently have said to you how much I'm against our interfering in other people's business. Sovereign countries should be allowed to get on with their own affairs within some very, very narrow limits, and I certainly don't feel that Americans who know little of this country should be allowed to dominate our politics. But it just seems to me to be a sign of the weakness of both the major political parties that they've actually been compelled to dance in this way. So you have Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, doing things which ought to be done ages and ages ago because of a fuss made across the Atlantic. And the leader of the Conservative Party is similarly. So I don't think that reflects well on our politics. But also I do think that people who claim to be patriotic should be more concerned about the meddling in our internal affairs by people from another jurisdiction.
But is it not rather ironic for you to say that, given the amount of interference that we've been taking part in other countries, like, for example...
Well, not for me it isn't, because I've opposed that interference.
Yeah. No, of course, I know you have.
I stick with the same principle. It may be for other people, but for me, it's absolute consistency. I think that in almost all matters, countries should run themselves and they should stick to their own business and stop messing around. It's not as if we're so free of problems in this country that we have so little to do, that crime has been so successfully contained, that the rape of children has been prevented so much that we're free to use our power and our wealth to go and mess around in other people's countries all over the world. It's absolutely not the case, and it always strikes me as bizarre, the contrast between our inability to run our own country, control our own shores, and our willingness to send task forces around the world to bomb other people.
Well, yes, indeed. But I suppose part of that is the so-called special relationship, and you talk about it in your piece about how, and I know I immediately felt recognition of the fact that, you know, in America they don't really understand the rest of the world. They don't really care about what you've got in your country. They don't really mind whether you turn up with a passport that they don't recognise, or, you know, some kind of visa or some kind of driving licence. But there is, of course, a connection through NATO. There is a connection through our sort of, you know, global international bodies that in the Times piece anyway, there's a kind of reference point to, because the suggestion is from Sebastian Gorka that, you know, if the special relationship is to be what it is, then Britain must have some responsibility vis-a-vis America's foreign policy.
Well, let's not have a special relationship then, because it seems to me to be very, very one-sided. If it exists at all, it consists in us being the fifth wheel in every American cart. I don't know what we get out of it. I searched for it when I lived in Washington, D.C. I could find no evidence that it exists. And I think British people in politics and the media should start recognizing that our relationship with the United States is that between any other country. They are not our special friends. They don't love us particularly. They're not going to come to our aid in all circumstances. We should have an adult, friendly relationship with them, but it should be on the normal basis that, you know, other countries do deals with other countries, and not that they try and pretend that they are, as I say, they're special friends. An embarrassing phrase if ever there was one.
Yes, I think that's probably true. Let's talk about Lucy Letby, piece on the front page of the Telegraph this morning. David Davis, who I think has long had this view, he's now wanting to champion the case of Lucy Letby. You've been speaking about it, writing about it for a long time. He says, more than likely, I know you've never quite gone this far, he says more than likely the NHS is responsible for many of the baby deaths, possibly all of them at her hospital.
Well, he has made some strong statements on this. As I say, I don't go so far because I don't think it's my business to do so. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the case, and I think that Sir David has in fact been working very hard on this in recent months, and has put in a lot of spade work, concentrated into a very powerful and concentrated speech, which is now available on Hansard. I've just tweeted the Hansard text for anybody to read, as is also the government's rather feeble response. But it's quite remarkable now what is on the record about this case. And the most striking thing, and the one which Sir David makes very plain in his speech, is how much the jury did not know. And the response of the justice system to the discovery that the jury didn't know these things has been to say, well, that's tough. The defense should have made these points during the trial. Well, that's a perfectly good judicial point, but it doesn't have much to do with natural justice. If somebody is in prison after a jury wasn't told the full facts about the case against her, then should that person be in prison, or should the case not be reopened? And his final point that if she isn't guilty, then she should be released in her 30s, not in her 50s, is, I think, understandable by anybody. If this woman is not guilty, then it is an absolute disgrace that she continues to be held. And therefore we must discover, to the total satisfaction of the judicial system, with all the evidence being presented, whether she is in fact guilty or not. And I think the fact that this has now reached Parliament is a sign that it's not going to go away. And I just do wish that the government bodies, particularly the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is supposed to look into this, would actually take seriously the issue. If it is, and I'm not saying that it is, if it is a major miscarriage of justice, if she has been wrongly convicted, then there are very few more serious bits of business before us than to clear it up.
And this moment in time, I suppose, it appears that there isn't any, shall we say, encouragement coming from the judicial sort of mainstream. They don't really want to let this case be reheard. They seem to be very reluctant to do so. And which brings us back to the whole, grooming gangs thing. There seems to be in this country a reticence in general to unpick decisions that have been made because you can't challenge them, which seems to be wrong.
That's not unreasonable. If you had a judicial system or any kind of criminal justice system which was constantly changing its verdicts, it would lose public confidence. You have to be careful not to just overturn verdicts and say that you were wrong simply because people make a fuss. It has to be done with great care and deliberation, and I'm in favour of that. And I can see why the judges are reluctant to overturn the verdicts of a jury, because jury verdicts are so important. I sympathise with all that, but that doesn't mean you can never do it, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't take it seriously when there's so much evidence now emerging in this case which suggests that something went seriously wrong. I think it just did, and I think the fact that it's now reached the House of Commons and has been raised there by a former cabinet minister of some experience and distinction must suggest to anybody who said this isn't some kind of conspiracy theory nutcase campaign. This is a real national problem which those who are responsible for justice in this country should be taking, I think, more seriously and more urgently than they are.
Sure. Peter, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Daily Mail this morning with his piece in the papers about beware of the Americans bearing gifts, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. He says Trumpoids and Muskites are only pretending to like you. They just want to use you.